Have you ever thought about what would happen if the most private parts of your life, your innermost thoughts, were suddenly exposed to the world? Imagine you're out on a peaceful walk, just minding your own business, and for some reason, you leave behind something. Maybe you forget your phone or your bag, but this wasn't just any ordinary thing you left behind. It was something that held your secrets, your fears, your dreams. And someone found it. The twist? That someone didn't just keep it to themselves. They published it. You might be wondering, who would do such a thing? And why? Stick with me for a moment because by the end of this video, you'll have the answer. But first, let me tell you about the story of Emma, a young woman with an unassuming life, yet with a journal that carried the weight of her thoughts. This is a story that goes beyond the written word. It's about trust, betrayal, and how a single mistake can turn everything upside down. I know you're curious now. You want to know what happens next, don't you? Well, I'm about to take you on a journey that will leave you on the edge of your seat, questioning everything you thought you knew about privacy, and maybe even yourself. Picture this. Emma, a quiet, introverted artist, had always found solace in her journal. Every page was filled with her musings about life, love, and the struggles she faced every day. It was her escape, her way of dealing with the overwhelming world around her. She never expected anyone to see what was written in those pages. After all, they were just words, scribbles that only she could fully understand. But one fateful afternoon, as she sat on a park bench near the city's heart, something unexpected happened. She placed her journal beside her while she took a call, just a few moments of distraction, but that brief lapse in attention would come at a great cost. When she returned, the bench was empty, her journal nowhere in sight. It should have been a simple loss. But what followed wasn't simple at all. Someone found the journal, and they did not just read it, they published it. Every intimate detail, every vulnerable moment, was laid bare for the entire world to see. Now, you're probably thinking, why wouldn't they just keep it to themselves? Who would do something like that? You're not alone in asking that. It's a question that haunts Emma's every waking moment. And, trust me, this is just the beginning of something much bigger. But before we dive into how this happened and who did it, I want you to take a second and think about something. If your private thoughts, the ones you've kept locked away from everyone, even your closest friends and family, suddenly became public knowledge, how would that make you feel? Would you be angry? Humiliated? Empowered? We live in a world where privacy is becoming increasingly scarce. Social media, constant connectivity, and the pressure to be on all the time has made our personal lives feel like an open book. But imagine having a piece of your soul, something so deeply personal and private, stolen from you and exposed to the public without your consent. That's what Emma faced when her journal was published. But who was behind it? Why would someone do such a thing? Was it for revenge? Was it for fame? Or was it something more sinister? The consequences of this betrayal didn't just affect Emma, they reached into every corner of her life. Her relationships, her career, even her sense of self, all of it was shaken to its core. And as she tried to put the pieces of her life back together, something even more shocking came to light. The person who published her journal wasn't a stranger. No, they were someone she knew. Someone she trusted. And that, my friends, is the heart of the mystery you're about to uncover. But don't think for a second that you have all the answers yet. I know you're sitting there, eager to figure out who did this and why, but this story has many layers, and we're only scratching the surface. So, stay with me, because we're going to peel back each layer together. As we dig deeper into the story, you'll come to understand that the act of betrayal wasn't the only shock Emma had to endure. The world's reaction to her journal's publication would leave her questioning not only her own judgment but also the very nature of human connection and trust. You see, once her journal was out in the world, things took an unexpected turn. People started to react. Some sympathized with Emma, others ridiculed her, and a few even felt inspired by her words. What was once a deeply personal collection of thoughts became a viral sensation. Emma became both a victim and an unwilling symbol of something much bigger than herself. Her pain, her struggles, and her triumphs were dissected, analyzed, and debated by thousands. But there was more to the story than just a journal. The question isn't just about who published it, but why they published it and how they were able to manipulate the world's perception of Emma in ways she never thought possible. By now, I know you're asking yourself, how does this all connect? What is the real story here? Hang tight, because we're about to uncover the truth together. As we dive deeper, you'll start to see how this betrayal not only shattered Emma's life but also changed the way we think about privacy in the digital age. This isn't just Emma's story, it's a reflection of the challenges we all face when it comes to protecting our own vulnerabilities in a world where nothing is truly private anymore. In the next part of the video, I'm going to reveal more about the aftermath of this betrayal and how it forced Emma to face the harsh reality that her journal wasn't just a collection of personal thoughts, it was a ticking time bomb. The world's reaction to her story was the catalyst for a chain of events that would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about herself and the people around her. So, stick around. You're going to want to see what happens next. Trust me, you haven't even scratched the surface yet. The twist is coming, and it will change everything. Don't go anywhere, the truth is waiting for you. The events that led Emma to that park bench weren't as innocent as they might initially seem. To understand why she was so vulnerable, we need to rewind a little, back to the days leading up to the journal's disappearance. Emma had always been a quiet soul, someone who preferred the comfort of her small studio apartment over the chaos of social gatherings. But even someone like her can't escape the currents of life entirely. Recently, she had been navigating a particularly difficult chapter. Her art, which had always been a form of therapy, had suddenly started to feel like a reflection of her personal struggles. Her work wasn't connecting with her audience the way it once did, and the creative block she was experiencing seemed to mirror everything she was feeling inside, a deep sense of isolation, confusion, and frustration. Her friends had noticed the change. They told her she seemed more distant, like she was retreating into herself even more than usual. One of her oldest friends, Sarah, had even mentioned it to her the week before the journal went missing. "Emma, what's going on? You've been acting so off. Is everything okay?" Sarah had asked her with genuine concern in her voice. Emma, of course, had brushed it off. She wasn't one to burden her friends with her problems. But there was more to it than just her creative slump. Emma was grappling with something far more personal, a painful breakup. It had happened 6 months prior, but the wounds were still fresh, and every time she tried to move on, something seemed to pull her back. She'd loved him deeply, believed they had something special. But when it ended, it left her heartbroken and questioning the nature of love itself. That breakup, along with her art not getting the recognition it deserved, had compounded her feelings of inadequacy. The journal had become her safe place in all of this. In its pages, she poured out everything she couldn't say aloud, her frustrations, her dreams, her deepest fears. It wasn't just a record of her day-to-day life, it was a map of her emotional landscape, filled with raw honesty and vulnerability. No one had ever read it, not even Sarah, who knew more about Emma than most people. And Emma was careful about where she took it. The journal wasn't something she'd leave just anywhere. Or at least, she never thought she would. That fateful day in the park, however, was different. Emma had planned to meet Sarah there for a quick catch-up after work. They'd made plans a few days before, and it was supposed to be just a simple afternoon of tea and talking, but Emma had arrived earlier, needing some space to think. The weather was perfect, and the park, located just a few blocks from her apartment, was her favorite spot to escape to. The journal was her constant companion, and that afternoon, it sat on the bench next to her, waiting for her to scribble her thoughts. But she'd gotten distracted. The phone call from her gallery, which had finally scheduled an exhibition for her artwork after months of silence, pulled her into a momentary excitement. She had gotten lost in the conversation, barely noticing as the minutes ticked by. By the time she hung up, the park had grown quieter. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the few people who had been walking around earlier had mostly dispersed. The bench, once occupied by the two of them, was now empty, and that's when she realized the journal was gone. She had left it behind. Panic surged through her, but she told herself it was fine. Maybe someone had moved it or found it and would turn it into the lost and found. But deep down, she knew something was off. Who would take it? Who would even think to take something so personal? There were moments that day when Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but she pushed those thoughts aside. It was just a journal, after all. She had her phone, her keys, everything she needed. But she was wrong. The next morning, the first sign that something was terribly amiss came when Emma's email inbox flooded with notifications. There was a link to a blog post titled The Secret Journal of a Heartbroken Artist. The post wasn't just a simple summary of someone's personal diary, it was a verbatim account of Emma's journal entries, transcribed and published for the world to read. Each entry was dated, each word an intimate peek into her most vulnerable thoughts, everything from her ex-boyfriend's cruel words, to the moments of doubt she'd experienced about her career, to the fantasies she'd entertained about running away and starting over somewhere far away. It was all there, out in the open, and Emma didn't even know how it had happened. At first, she thought it was a sick joke. But when she scrolled down the page, her heart sank. There were comments. Thousands of them. Some were sympathetic, some were downright cruel. But there were too many to ignore, and all of them seemed to be sharing the same thing, an unspoken connection to her words. For the first time in her life, Emma's personal pain had been weaponized, manipulated for clicks, and dissected by people she'd never met. The worst part? The post was growing in popularity, and every time she refreshed the page, the number of views was rising. Who would do this to her? Who had taken her journal, and why? There were so many possible answers, so many different directions Emma's mind raced to in search of an explanation. Was it someone from her past? Sarah? Could she have betrayed Emma's trust in such a way? Sarah was one of the few people who had known about the journal, though she had never shown an interest in it before. But Emma couldn't bring herself to believe that Sarah would do something like this. Sarah had always been her closest confidant, the one person who truly understood her. Yet, that small seed of doubt lingered. Could it have been someone from the gallery? There had been whispers about the gallery owners' growing frustration with Emma's lack of new work. Maybe, in some twisted attempt to force her into action, someone thought publishing her thoughts would inspire her or perhaps punish her for not meeting their expectations. But even that didn't sit right with Emma. The pieces didn't add up. The more she thought about it, the more she felt she was missing something important, some detail, some clue that would lead her to the truth. But it was slipping through her fingers, just out of reach. As the hours went by, Emma's anxiety deepened, and her life began to spiral. She tried contacting the site that had published the journal, but they were unresponsive. She filed a report with the police, but they couldn't offer much help either, not without more evidence. And as the days passed, the journal's publication wasn't just a fleeting scandal, it became a viral phenomenon, with people discussing her every word, interpreting her feelings in ways she never intended. The mystery of who had published her journal, and why they'd done it, remained unsolved. The only thing Emma could do was watch as her life unraveled, piece by piece. But deep inside, Emma couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she wasn't the only one caught in this web of betrayal. The person behind the publication, whoever they were, hadn't just targeted her, they had played a much bigger game. And as more pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, Emma realized that the mystery she was facing went far beyond her journal. It was something darker, something deeper, and she was determined to uncover the truth. But would she be able to before it was too late? Keep watching, because the deeper we go, the more secrets are uncovered, and the more the story begins to unravel in ways you won't see coming. Emma wasn't ready for what happened next. After days of unanswered emails and mounting frustration, she finally managed to track down the blogger who had first published her journal. She thought, at the very least, she could confront them, demand answers, and perhaps make them take the post down. Armed with determination and a sense of urgency she hadn't felt in years, Emma made her way to the address listed on the site, a small, unremarkable office in the outskirts of the city. When she arrived, it was a quiet, almost eerie part of town, with narrow alleyways and old buildings that seemed to have stories of their own. The sign outside the building said Digital Media Agency, but the place looked like it hadn't seen a visitor in ages. The air was thick with uncertainty as she walked through the dusty glass door. The receptionist, a young woman with disheveled hair and a tired look, barely looked up when Emma explained who she was. She wasn't surprised to hear about the journal. "Yeah, we know," the receptionist muttered. "You're not the first person to come by here today. They've been getting lots of messages." Emma's heart raced. Who else had been looking for answers? It wasn't just her journal at stake anymore, it was becoming a public spectacle. As the receptionist reluctantly led her to the back office, Emma's mind swirled with possibilities. She was so close. She could almost taste the truth. When she entered the office, the man sitting at the desk was nothing like she had imagined. He looked ordinary enough, but there was something about him, the coldness in his eyes, the way his fingers tapped rhythmically on his keyboard, that made Emma feel uneasy. "You're the girl whose journal we published," he said in a flat, disinterested voice. "What do you want?" Emma's anger flared, but she managed to keep her composure. "I want you to take it down. I want you to stop using my personal thoughts for clicks and views," she demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and frustration. The man didn't seem fazed. "It's too late for that. The post has already gone viral. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, sweetheart," he said with a dismissive shrug. "Besides, you're the one who left it in the park. You should have been more careful." The words stung, but they weren't the real issue. Emma's mind was racing, searching for something, anything, that would help her understand why this man seemed so indifferent. He wasn't acting like someone who had just stolen a private diary and thrown it into the world's spotlight. He seemed almost too calm, as if this wasn't his first time dealing with a situation like this. And then, as if on cue, his eyes narrowed and his voice lowered. "Listen, I don't know who you think you're dealing with, but you need to stop asking questions. Just let it go. It'll blow over." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Let it go. Was this guy threatening her? The warning in his voice wasn't subtle. There was a quiet menace to his words, as though he knew something she didn't. He had a sense of control that made Emma feel small, vulnerable. But she wasn't about to back down. "I won't let it go. I'm going to find out who did this, and I'm going to make sure they pay for it," she said, her voice more firm than she felt. He gave a smirk, but before he could respond, there was a sudden knock on the door, followed by a brief exchange of words that Emma didn't catch. The man's demeanor shifted. He stood up abruptly and motioned for her to leave. "That's all I can do for you today. You should go now," he said, his tone sharp and final. Emma hesitated for a moment, sensing that something wasn't right, but she knew she had to leave before things escalated further. Just as she was about to step out of the office, something caught her eye on the desk. A folder. It wasn't like the others scattered around, it was thick, and there was a name on it that made Emma's blood run cold. Her name. It was just a slip of paper sticking out, but the sight of it sent a shiver down her spine. It was the same font used on the blog post. A chill ran through her, but the man was already walking towards the door. "You should really go now," he said, pushing her out. "You don't want to get in over your head." She left, heart pounding in her chest, but her curiosity gnawed at her. She hadn't imagined it. That folder was important. There was no way she was walking away from that. It could have been the key to everything, the missing piece of the puzzle she so desperately needed. But when she tried to return later that day, the office was closed. The blinds were drawn, the lights off. No one answered the phone. For a moment, Emma thought she was just being paranoid. But something told her this wasn't a coincidence. She drove home, fighting the urge to throw herself into bed and forget the entire ordeal. But she couldn't. The nagging feeling that something wasn't right stayed with her. As she turned onto her street, her phone buzzed. A message. It was from Sarah. "Emma, I'm really worried about you. Please stop digging. Some things are better left alone." Her heart skipped. What did Sarah mean by that? Was Sarah involved in this? Had she known something and kept it from her? Emma stared at the message, her mind racing. She had always trusted Sarah, but now? Now everything felt like it was unraveling. If Sarah had been behind this, why wouldn't she just tell Emma the truth? The message wasn't just a warning, it felt like a subtle threat. Was Sarah trying to protect her? Or was she trying to keep Emma from digging any deeper? As Emma stared at her phone, conflicted and confused, a new message popped up. This one wasn't from Sarah. It was from an anonymous account. It read simply, "Stop looking for answers. Some truths aren't meant to be found." Who was it? What was the person warning her about? Had Emma stumbled onto something bigger than she realized? As the night stretched on, Emma felt the walls closing in. The deeper she dug, the more she uncovered, but with each discovery came more questions, and the threats were growing more real. Who could she trust? Who was behind this? And why had they warned her to stop? Emma didn't know what to do anymore. All she could do was hold her breath, keep her eyes open, and wait for the next move in this dangerous game. The answers were out there, but she had no idea just how far the truth would take her. Would she dare to find out? Keep watching. This is only the beginning. The next few days were a blur for Emma. The messages, the threats, the sense of being watched, everything had begun to consume her. Every shadow seemed like a threat, every unfamiliar noise a signal that someone was always just behind her. She tried to ignore the anxiety creeping in, tried to focus on piecing together the mystery, but it was becoming impossible. Each lead she chased seemed to dead end or twist back on itself, and no matter how hard she tried to reach out to anyone who might help her, the answers slipped further from her grasp. And as if the universe had a cruel sense of humor, just when she thought things couldn't get worse, they did. It all started with a call from her brother, Daniel. He wasn't exactly the type to get involved in her personal drama. He had his own life, his own problems, but there was something about his voice when he picked up the phone that immediately made Emma's stomach drop. It wasn't just concern in his tone, it was fear. "Emma, I don't know how to say this, but you need to be careful. I think they're after me too." Emma froze. "What? Who's after you?" "I don't know. But I got this weird email this morning. It was from an anonymous account. It said, 'You've been too close to the truth. Stop before it's too late.'" He paused, the silence on the other end heavy. "I thought it was some kind of prank at first, but then I started thinking, what if it's connected to what's happening to you? What if they're watching all of us?" Emma's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't even told Daniel about the messages, the threats, anything about the journal. He wasn't supposed to know. But now, somehow, it seemed like they both were tangled in something far bigger than they had ever anticipated. Who was behind all this? And why had they involved Daniel? She quickly dialed his number back. "What else did the email say?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a hesitation before he answered. "It had a link in it. When I clicked it, it was just a cryptic image, a black and white photo of a park bench, like the one you sit at. But the weird thing is, the bench was covered in leaves, and there was a piece of paper in the corner, crumpled up like someone had discarded it there. It looked like part of a journal page." Emma's heart skipped a beat. The image was too familiar, too connected to the very thing she had been trying to solve. Her mind raced. The idea of her journal being involved in something bigger, something beyond her own life, felt increasingly real. Had someone been watching her every move? Had they been watching Daniel too? The thought made her stomach turn. Who could possibly have that kind of power, that level of control? And why were they taunting them both? "What do you think it means?" Emma's voice was strained now, the walls closing in tighter with every word. Daniel sighed. "I don't know. But I've been looking through my old messages and trying to figure out if there's something I missed, someone I didn't notice at the time. And I found something strange, something that ties into everything that's been happening to you." Emma felt the air leave her lungs. "What is it?" "I was at your apartment a couple of weeks ago, remember? You were getting some of your art ready for the gallery, and I think I saw something on your desk. A piece of paper, folded up, it was under a pile of sketches. I didn't think much of it then, but when I looked closer, I noticed the handwriting. It was your handwriting." Emma felt a jolt of panic. "What do you mean? My handwriting?" "Yeah, it was like a note. But it didn't make sense. It was just a single line that said, 'They're closer than you think.' I didn't think it was important at the time, but now, I don't know, Emma. It feels like everything's connected." Everything felt like it was falling apart. The lines between what was real and what was paranoia had blurred. Someone was toying with them, playing a game that neither Emma nor Daniel could comprehend. And that cryptic message Daniel had found? Her handwriting? It felt like someone had been planting these things in their lives, pushing them toward a truth they weren't ready for. Could she have written it herself? No. She was certain she hadn't, and yet, the words were undeniably hers. As Emma's mind spiraled into a mess of confusion, a new wave of dread washed over her. This wasn't just about a stolen journal anymore. This was about something more sinister. Whoever was behind all this had been watching her, manipulating her, pulling strings from the shadows. And they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. "Are you sure you're okay, Daniel?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. His silence hung between them, suffocating. "I don't know, Em. Something doesn't feel right. I've been trying to piece it together, but the more I dig, the more it feels like I'm being pushed into something I shouldn't know. It's like someone's trying to control the narrative, but I'm not sure who's writing it." Emma felt the weight of his words settle on her chest. She wanted to tell him to be careful, to stop looking for answers. But she knew she couldn't. Because the truth was, she didn't know how much time they had left before whatever was happening to them spiraled completely out of control. And the more they uncovered, the more dangerous it became. As if on cue, Emma's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. This time, it was a picture, one that took her breath away. It was a photo of her apartment, taken from the street. The caption read, "You're not as hidden as you think." Someone had been watching her. Someone was always watching. The realization hit Emma like a freight train. It wasn't just the journal, the messages, the threats, it was everything. This was orchestrated. Someone had been moving pieces in her life long before the journal was published. Someone knew every step she would take, every decision she would make. They were pulling strings, pushing her further into a corner she couldn't escape. She had to know who was behind this, but the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. As she sat there, her phone still buzzing in her hand, Emma realized one terrifying fact: whoever was doing this was already one step ahead of her. And with every clue she uncovered, the stakes grew higher. But what was the truth? And who could she trust? The answers were out there somewhere. But they were fading, slipping into the shadows. Emma wasn't sure how much longer she could keep chasing them before everything fell apart. And she wasn't the only one at risk anymore. The next 48 hours felt like a blur, but it was in those hours that Emma's life began to fracture. The increasing sense of paranoia had already begun to take root, gnawing at the edges of her mind, but it wasn't until she received the call from Sarah that she fully realized how dangerous this had become. "Emma, I'm scared," Sarah's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "I think they're watching me." Emma's stomach sank. It wasn't just the anonymous messages anymore. Sarah, one of the few people she trusted, was now tangled up in whatever dark web had been spun around them. She wasn't sure whether it was the words themselves or the fear in Sarah's voice, but something about the call shattered her fragile sense of control. "What do you mean they're watching you?" Emma asked, her mind racing, trying to piece together any new information. Her eyes darted toward the windows, even though she knew no one could be out there. I don't know," Sarah stuttered, the sound of her breath shallow. "I've been getting these strange knocks on my door, late at night, but when I look through the peephole, there's no one there. But this morning, I found a note in my mailbox. It just said, 'You're next.' I don't know who it's from, but it's too much, Emma. I'm scared." Emma felt her heart race, her breath quickening. She had always known that she wasn't alone in this, that someone or something was pulling strings behind the scenes, but hearing Sarah so afraid made it all too real. She'd felt her own paranoia growing with every passing day, but hearing Sarah's fear, hearing her voice crack under the pressure of the unknown, pushed Emma to the edge. "I'm coming over," Emma said, her voice sharper than she intended. She didn't wait for Sarah's response. The fear gnawed at her insides, telling her that if she didn't do something right now, if she didn't get to Sarah and make sure she was okay, there would be no time left. Her own instincts screamed at her to act, to protect the people she loved before this madness completely overtook them. When Emma arrived at Sarah's apartment, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The building, usually bustling with activity, felt unnervingly quiet, almost abandoned. She walked up the creaky steps, her shoes tapping against the floor as she ascended, each step echoing in the hollow stairwell. The closer she got to Sarah's door, the more her stomach churned. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her, the feeling that someone or something was waiting just behind the door. Emma knocked once, twice. The door creaked open slowly, and Sarah appeared, pale and wide-eyed, her hand shaking slightly as she held the door ajar. "Emma," she whispered urgently, glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to be lurking in the hallway behind her. "It's worse than I thought." But the truth, no matter how dangerous, was still out there. And someone, somewhere, was waiting for her to find it. Emma's hands were shaking as she and Sarah reached the secluded park just outside the city. They thought they were safe, just a few minutes away from the apartment, hidden in plain sight. Sarah was nearly silent now, too terrified to even speak, her wide eyes constantly scanning their surroundings as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows at any second. Emma's heart hammered in her chest, the gnawing fear that had been building up in her mind now solidifying into something much darker. They had reached the park bench, the same bench from the pictures, the one that seemed to be a strange symbol of all the twisted events that had unfolded over the past week. Emma stared at it, unsure of what to feel. Every inch of her body was telling her to run, to get as far away from this place as possible, but something stopped her. Something deep inside, a gut feeling, urged her to sit, to pause, and to think. She wasn't sure if it was the paranoia, the exhaustion, or the sheer weight of everything that had happened, but as she approached the bench, she noticed something. A faint glimmer of light reflecting off something tucked between the slats. Her pulse quickened. Reaching down, she carefully pried it free, a small envelope, yellowed with age. The handwriting on the front was familiar, but it took Emma a moment to place it. It was Sarah's handwriting, looping and elegant, yet strangely distorted, as if written under duress. Sarah stood behind her, nervously shifting from foot to foot. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a little too high-pitched. "I don't know," Emma whispered, staring at the envelope. There was no return address, no other identifying marks, just her name Emma written in the same careful script. She tore it open, the paper crinkling in her hands, and unfolded it. The words inside were chilling. "I know you're scared. But you should be more worried about Sarah. She's been hiding things from you. The truth isn't what you think. She's the key to all of this. Find out what she knows before it's too late." Emma froze, the blood draining from her face. Her mind raced, reeling from the implications of the note. Sarah. Hiding things? Emma looked up at her friend, her throat tight, unable to speak, but her eyes searching Sarah's face, looking for something, anything, that could explain this. She wanted to believe it was some kind of sick joke, a twisted ploy to keep her off track, but the words were too clear, too direct. It was as if someone who had been pulling the strings all along, was finally revealing their hand. "Sarah, what's going on?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper, as though speaking any louder would shatter the fragile illusion of safety they had left. Sarah shifted uneasily, her gaze avoiding Emma's. I don't know what you mean. What's that note?" Her voice was shaky, but there was something in the way she spoke, something Emma couldn't quite place, that felt wrong. Emma felt a sickening twist in her stomach. Could it be true? Was Sarah involved in this? Was she somehow part of the plan all along? "No," Sarah said, almost too quickly. "No, Emma. I swear I don't know anything about it. I haven't done anything. This whole thing, it's been terrifying. You think I would?" She stopped herself, the words abruptly cut off by a choked sob. Emma's gaze locked onto Sarah's, trying to read her, trying to find some clue, some sign that her friend wasn't the person this note painted her to be. But all she saw was fear, raw and unguarded. Fear that mirrored her own. Just as Emma opened her mouth to speak again, something sharp and unsettling punctured the tension between them, a distant sound, barely perceptible at first, but growing louder. Footsteps. Fast, heavy, deliberate. Someone was coming. Emma's heart skipped a beat, her hand instinctively reaching for Sarah's, pulling her back toward the shadows of the trees. They couldn't stay here. Not now. "Come on," Emma urged, tugging Sarah toward the cover of the trees, the path leading to the edge of the park. But before they could take more than a few steps, the footsteps halted abruptly. And then, a voice, low and menacing, called out to them. "Emma! Sarah, don't run. It's too late for that." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. It was too familiar, too close for comfort. She spun around to face the figure stepping into view, someone she thought she'd left behind. Someone she trusted. It was Daniel. Her brother stood there, his face eerily calm, almost too calm. But it was the look in his eyes that sent a chill down Emma's spine. There was something dark, something knowing in them. Something that hadn't been there before. He wasn't the protective older brother she had always leaned on, he was different now. Cold. Calculating. I know you've been looking for answers, Daniel said, his voice steady. But you've been looking in all the wrong places. Emma opened her mouth to speak, to demand an explanation, but before she could form the words, Daniel raised a hand, cutting her off. No more running, Emma. You're too deep in it now. It's all been set in motion. You just don't realize it yet. Sarah looked from Emma to Daniel, her eyes wide with confusion, her voice shaky as she whispered, "What's going on? What's he talking about?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment before turning back to Emma. You think this has been some random chain of events? That everything that's happened was just a coincidence? No. This was planned from the beginning, Emma. And you've been the puppet the whole time. But it wasn't just the journal, it was you. The ground beneath Emma's feet felt like it was crumbling away. Her mind spun as she tried to process what he was saying. Puppet. Planned. She'd been the target all along, but who was behind it? And why? Everything that had happened to her, the journal, the threats, the mysterious messages, had been part of some larger game. But what was the endgame? Daniel, Emma said, her voice trembling. What do you mean? What are you saying? Daniel's lips curled into a cold, almost pitying smile. You've been chasing the wrong story, Emma. It's never been about the journal. It's about you. And now, it's too late to back out. As his words sank in, the horrifying realization hit her. Everything she thought she knew, every connection, every clue, had been part of a far more intricate plot than she could have ever imagined. And Sarah, the one person she thought she could trust, was somehow connected to all of this. The stakes were higher than she ever could have anticipated, and now she was trapped in the middle of something far darker than she had ever feared. But one question burned in her mind, one she couldn't shake. Who had really been controlling everything all along? And why had Daniel come back? Emma's pulse thundered in her ears as Daniel's cold gaze locked onto hers. And if she did, could she trust anyone? Even Sarah? Even Daniel? The air was thick with tension, every breath Emma took feeling heavier than the last. The ultimatum had been given: stay silent, walk away, or continue down the dark path and risk losing everything she loved. It should have been an easy choice, but it wasn't. The weight of the decision pressed down on her chest, suffocating her, leaving her breathless. Daniel's cold gaze was still on her, as if daring her to make a move. But it wasn't just him now. It was Sarah, too. Her best friend, the one person who she thought she could always count on, standing there, looking almost detached, as if the choice wasn't even hers to make anymore. For a moment, the world stood still. Emma felt like a pawn in a game where the rules kept changing, where every move she made only pushed her closer to a dark, uncertain future. She wanted to scream, to throw her hands up and demand answers. She wanted to lash out, to fight back. But she didn't know who the enemy was anymore. Was it Daniel, the brother who had always been her protector, now revealing himself to be a part of something far bigger and far darker than she could have ever imagined? Or was it Sarah, the person she had confided in, who had been keeping secrets from her this whole time, silently complicit in whatever game was being played? Why are you doing this? Emma whispered, her voice breaking, her hands trembling as she stared at Daniel, searching his eyes for some hint of the person he used to be. But there was nothing there. Just cold calculation. What do you want from me? Daniel took a slow step toward her, his voice dangerously calm. It's not what I want from you, Emma. It's what you've already become. You're part of this now, whether you want to be or not. The journal wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just a message. It was a key. A key to something far bigger than you think. And now that you've opened it, you're in deeper than you can imagine. Emma's mind spun. The journal. The messages. It had all been a setup, a trap, from the very beginning. But to what end? Why her? And who else was involved? She thought about the notes, the hidden warnings, the cryptic threats, but none of it made sense. None of it added up. But then Daniel's next words hit her like a punch to the gut. There's more, Emma. You're not the only one looking for answers. You've been a part of something much bigger than just you and me. It's all connected, the journal, the messages, everything. And now, the people who started this, they're closing in. They've known about you for longer than you realize. They know everything. His eyes bored into hers, dark and unblinking. You've been watched this entire time. A cold shiver ran down Emma's spine. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, a rush of dread flooding her veins. She wasn't just in danger. She was being controlled. Trapped in a web of lies and manipulation. And all along, she had been chasing a shadow, a faint glimpse of something she couldn't see clearly. That's why you're here, Daniel, she said, her voice shaking, but steadying with the weight of her realization. You're not trying to protect me. You're trying to keep me from finding out the truth. You're part of it. You've always been part of it. Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, he simply nodded, his expression unreadable. It's not that simple, Emma. You're in deeper than you think. They've set this up for years. This is bigger than any of us. I didn't have a choice. But you chose this, Emma said through gritted teeth, the realization hitting her like a freight train. You chose this path. You chose to be part of whatever this is. And now you want me to walk away. You don't understand, Daniel growled, frustration edging his voice. It's too dangerous. If you keep digging, they'll come after everyone. It's not just about you. It's about the people who are working behind the scenes. People you thought you could trust. Before Emma could process his words, Sarah stepped forward, her eyes wide with fear. Emma, please, listen to him. It's not just about us anymore. This is about something bigger. There are more people involved than we ever realized. There are other people, powerful people, who've been pulling the strings all along. And if you keep digging, they'll come after us. They'll come after you. A sick realization washed over Emma. She wasn't just up against Daniel and Sarah. She wasn't even just up against the hidden forces who had been orchestrating this from the shadows. She was up against something far more dangerous, something far more ruthless. And they had been setting her up from the start, using her, manipulating her every move. No, Emma said, shaking her head, the weight of the truth settling on her shoulders like a 1,000-pound weight. I won't stop. I can't stop now. I need to know who's behind this. I need to know who's been pulling the strings. You don't understand, Daniel repeated, his voice rising with desperation now. You think this is about finding answers? No. This is about survival. If you keep pushing, if you keep searching, they'll come for you, Emma. They'll destroy everything. You think we're the only ones involved in this? You think we're the only ones who know what's really going on? There are others out there, people you've never even heard of. And they'll do whatever it takes to protect the secret. Emma's stomach twisted. There was no going back now. The truth was too close. She could feel it, just beyond her grasp, and the more she pushed, the closer she came to something far darker than she could have imagined. It wasn't just about the journal. It wasn't just about Sarah. It was about something bigger, something deeper, something that spanned farther than she could have ever guessed. The people involved weren't just local. They weren't just hidden in the shadows of her life. No. This was an international web of corruption, power, and secrets. And now, Emma was tangled in it. But the worst part wasn't just what she was learning, it was the betrayal she felt. The realization that the people she trusted most, the people who were supposed to protect her, had been lying to her all along. Daniel. Sarah. They had been part of this from the start, each of them playing their part in the same twisted game. And now Emma had a choice, one that could change everything. She could back down. She could walk away and save herself. But she knew deep down that she couldn't. Not now. Not when everything she'd been through, everything she'd uncovered, had led her to this moment. The truth was within her reach, but so was the danger. And if she kept pushing, if she kept asking the questions that no one wanted her to ask, there was a price to pay. She could feel it closing in. A storm on the horizon, and the only way out was through it. With a steadying breath, Emma turned to Sarah, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and resolve. "I'm not stopping. I have to know. And you, Sarah, you've been hiding something from me. It's time to tell me what's really going on. Now." Sarah's face twisted with guilt, but there was something else in her eyes. Something darker. Something that told Emma that the real answers were even more dangerous than she could have ever anticipated. The night was darker than Emma had ever seen, the kind of inky blackness that seemed to swallow everything in its path, leaving only the hollow echoes of her footsteps. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat a loud reminder of what was at stake, and the cold air cut through her like a knife. She had made her choice. She had pushed forward, despite the warning from Daniel, despite Sarah's desperate pleas. She was done running. She had to know the truth. And tonight, she was going to find it, no matter the cost. She didn't care who was watching, who was lurking in the shadows. They could try to silence her. They could threaten her. But they were too late. Emma stood before the imposing building, the one that had always been just out of sight. The one no one ever talked about. The one that, until now, she had never thought twice about. But as she stared up at its darkened windows, the reality of what she was about to uncover hit her with full force. This was it. This was the place where the conspiracy began, the place where all the threads she had been pulling at had led. She could almost feel the weight of the secrets pressing against the glass, the ones hidden behind closed doors, buried so deep that no one, not even she, had been able to see them. Until now. With trembling hands, Emma pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, suffocating in its silence. The dimly lit hallway stretched ahead of her, an eerie, almost ghostly glow coming from the far end. There was no turning back now. She could hear her breath, shallow and fast, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins kept her moving. As she walked further into the building, every step felt heavier, the weight of the past closing in on her. She thought about Daniel's words, his warnings. She thought about Sarah, standing behind her, pleading for her to stop. They had lied. They had been part of it all, feeding her fragments of the truth, always holding something back. But now, she knew. She knew what they were hiding. When she reached the end of the hall, the door to the inner office loomed before her. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had been expecting her. Inside, the light was bright, almost blinding after the dark hall. Her eyes scanned the room, settling on the figure sitting at the large, polished desk. "Emma," came the cold voice that sent a chill down her spine. "I was wondering when you'd finally show up." Her breath caught in her throat as she took in the person sitting before her. It was not who she had expected. Not at all. "Dr. Sinclair," Emma whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. You've been behind this all along." Dr. Sinclair, the well-respected psychiatrist, the one who had always seemed so neutral, so harmless, now looked like something else entirely. His calm demeanor gave nothing away, but there was a glint in his eyes, a gleam of power, of control, that she had never seen before. He didn't even flinch when he saw the shock on her face. "Yes, Emma," he said softly, his voice oddly soothing, like he was speaking to a child. "You've been a part of something far bigger than you ever realized. And now, here we are. Just you, me, and the truth. The truth." That word was like a knife, cutting through the layers of lies Emma had been living under. She took a step forward, her legs barely holding her up as the magnitude of what she had uncovered crashed into her all at once. The journal, the messages, the threats, everything had been part of a carefully orchestrated plan to reel her in. To make her part of it, unknowingly, so that when the time came, she could be used as a pawn in their game. "You never understood, did you?" Dr. Sinclair continued, his voice almost pitying. "You were never meant to figure it out. You were just a piece of the puzzle. A way to make sure things went according to plan. The journal was meant to lead you here. It was meant to make you think you had control, when in reality, we've been controlling everything." Emma's mind raced, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. You've been using me? This whole time?" Dr. Sinclair gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Not just you, Emma. Everyone." The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing in as the full weight of his words hit her. The conspiracy wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about Daniel or Sarah. No, this was much, much bigger than any of them. People at the highest levels of power, people with influence, had been manipulating events from behind the scenes. They had been playing a game with lives, using people like pawns, controlling their every move. And Emma had been too blind, too trusting to see it until now. But there was one thing she hadn't anticipated. One thing that completely shattered the fragile sense of security she had left. "There's something you don't know," Dr. Sinclair said, his smile growing colder. "Sarah was never your friend. She's been playing you from the beginning. Just like everyone else." Emma's stomach lurched as Dr. Sinclair pressed a button on his desk. The screen in front of him flickered to life, revealing a series of images of Sarah, images of her, all taken without their knowledge. Every conversation they'd had. Every meeting. Every secret Sarah had kept from her. It was all there, laid out before her, undeniable and horrifying. "No," Emma whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, that can't be true." "It is, Emma," Dr. Sinclair replied, his voice colder now, more menacing. "Sarah's role in all of this was to get close to you. To make sure you played your part, just like the rest of them. And now, the final act is about to begin." Suddenly, the door behind Emma slammed shut. She spun around, panic surging through her, but there was no one there. She was trapped. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the manipulation, the lies, collapsed on her all at once. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The walls felt like they were closing in, and for the first time in the entire journey, Emma wasn't sure she could escape. Dr. Sinclair stood slowly, walking around the desk to face her. He was no longer the kindly, respected doctor. He was the puppet master, the orchestrator of a plan so dark and twisted that Emma couldn't even begin to comprehend the full scale of it. "You've come this far, Emma," he said softly, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. "But it's over now. There's no more running. No more digging. The truth is out there, but it's not the truth you think it is. And now you'll learn just how much you've been played." Emma felt a surge of fear, but also a strange, cold anger. The truth was within reach. And no matter what Dr. Sinclair said, no matter how deep the conspiracy ran, she wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not when she had come so far. But just as she was about to take a step forward, a loud crash echoed through the building. The sound of glass breaking, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Emma's heart raced as she spun around, realizing that someone had followed her. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here. Before she could react, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Sarah. But she wasn't alone. Standing behind her, his face hidden in the darkness, was another man. Another player in this game. Sarah's face was blank, emotionless as she stepped into the room, her eyes flickering with something Emma couldn't place. Betrayal? Guilt? Or something worse? "I told you to stop, Emma," Sarah said softly, her voice barely a whisper, but the words struck like a knife to the chest. "I didn't want this. But I had no choice." In that moment, everything Emma thought she knew shattered. Sarah had been in on it all along. Dr. Sinclair wasn't the only one playing her. Sarah, the one person she thought she could trust, had been another piece in their game. And the final twist, the one Emma hadn't seen coming, was the most dangerous of all. The man behind Sarah, the one who had been lurking in the shadows all along, stepped forward into the light. It was Daniel. Emma stood frozen, the weight of the revelation crashing down around her. Daniel, the one person she had trusted above all others, the one who had promised to protect her, now stood before her, his eyes cold and unreadable. Everything she had believed, the journal, the messages, the seemingly random events that had led her to this moment, had been part of a much larger plan. And now, as the truth unraveled in front of her, she realized the horror of it all. The conspiracy, the manipulation, the lies, they were all tangled up in her life, her choices, her every step. Her mind spun as she tried to process everything she had learned, but there was no time to dwell on the past. She had to make a choice, and it had to be now. Daniel's presence was overwhelming. He stepped forward, his face stoic, his eyes never leaving hers. "I never wanted you to get involved, Emma," he said, his voice quieter now, almost regretful. "But once you started digging, once you uncovered the truth, there was no going back. You were always going to find out. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop you from being a part of this, even if I tried. His words hung in the air, thick with the weight of years of deception, of secrets buried so deep they had become part of their very existence. But I can't let you go now. Not when we're so close to the end. The end. Emma's mind raced. She had been dragged into a game that was never meant for her, forced into a web of lies and manipulation. But she wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not after everything she had uncovered. You don't get to decide that for me, Daniel, she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. You don't get to control my life, not anymore. I'm not part of your plan. I never was. Daniel's eyes darkened, but for the first time, Emma saw something more than coldness in them. There was hesitation, maybe even fear. The control he had once held over her was slipping. You don't understand, Emma. I never wanted you to be caught in this. But I can't let you walk away, not now. You're in this too deep. For a brief moment, Emma considered his words, the complexity of the situation gnawing at her. She thought of everything she had sacrificed to uncover the truth, the friendships shattered, the relationships destroyed, the trust she had lost. But there was one thing that kept her grounded, one thing that anchored her in the chaos, her own will, her own determination. She wasn't going to let them win. You're right, she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength that surprised even her. I am in this too deep. But not because of you. Because of me. I decided to dig. I decided to push through the lies. And I'm going to finish this. I'm going to take control of my own life, my own story. And I'm not going to let you or anyone else keep me from the truth. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. His gaze flickered to Sarah, who stood silently behind him, her eyes downcast. Emma's heart twisted. Sarah, the one person who had been her closest ally, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. The trust she had placed in her had been shattered, leaving Emma to grapple with the reality of it all. But despite the betrayal, despite the overwhelming sense of loss, Emma didn't let it break her. Instead, it fueled her resolve. She could feel it now, the power of knowing the truth, of reclaiming her agency. The conspiracy, the manipulation, the lies, all of it had been built on the foundation of fear. But fear had no hold over her anymore. As Emma turned to face Daniel one last time, she felt the weight of everything she had learned settling in her chest. The journal, the hidden messages, the years of deception, it was all part of a much larger game, one that reached further than she could have ever imagined. But even in the face of it all, she knew one thing: the truth was never truly out of reach. No matter how hard they tried to bury it, no matter how many obstacles they threw in her way, the truth always found a way to surface. I'm done, Emma said firmly, taking a step back. I'm done playing your game. And with that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the twisted conspiracy, the people who had once been her family, the people who had used her for their own gain. But as she stepped into the unknown, Emma felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The battle had been hard fought, and the scars would remain. But she had won. She had taken control of her own life. And now, it was time to move forward, to rebuild, to start again. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the sound echoed in the empty room. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. But in that silence, something else lingered, a quiet sense of unease. Because even though Emma had walked away from the conspiracy, even though she had found the courage to break free, the truth was still out there. And someone, somewhere, was still watching. As the camera zoomed in on Emma's retreating figure, the audience was left with one final, haunting question. Was the truth really over? Or was this just the beginning of something even more dangerous, something even more twisted than they could ever have imagined? The screen faded to black, and the credits began to roll. But the feeling of uncertainty, of lingering danger, stayed with the audience, a shadow that would haunt them long after the video ended.